by Jules Verne. Translated by Anonymous. Chapter 11. What was found in the notebook of J.T. Maston and what it no longer contained. The notebook, which was taken possession of by the police, had 30 pages covered with formulae and figures, including all the calculations of J.T. Maston. It was a work of the higher mathematics, which could only be appreciated by the highest mathematicians. The following formula, 1/2 (v squared minus v naught squared) is equal to gr r by x minus 1 plus m dash by m r by d minus x minus r by d minus r which was also to be found in the calculation of from the earth to the moon, held a prominent place in these calculations. The majority of people could not understand anything of what was written in the notebook, but it would have given satisfaction to give out the results, which every one expected with so much curiosity. And so it was all the newspapers, and the inquiry committee as well, tried to read the formula of this celebrated calculator. In the work of Mr. Maston were found some problems correctly executed, others half solved, etc. The calculations had been made with great exactness, and of course the inquiry committee supposed that they were absolutely correct. If the plan was carried out fully, it was seen that without a doubt the earth's axis would be greatly changed, and that the terrible disasters which were predicted would take place in full force. The reports made by the inquiry committee to the different newspapers ran as follows. The idea followed by the administrative council of the N.P.P.A., and the object of which is to substitute a new axis for the old one, is to be carried out by means of the recoil of a piece of ordnance fixed at a certain point of the earth. If the barrel of this device is immovably fixed to the ground, it is not at all doubtful that it will communicate its shock over our whole planet. The engine adopted by the engineers of the society is then nothing but a monster cannon, the effect of shooting which would be absolutely nothing if it were pointed vertically. To produce the highest effect it is necessary to point it horizontally towards the north or south, and this is the last direction which has been chosen by Barbicane & Co. Under these conditions the recoil would produce a movement of the earth towards the north, a movement similar to that of one billiard ball touched very slightly to the other. This was really just what the clever Alcide Pierdeux had predicted. As soon as the cannon has been fired, the center line of the earth would be displaced in a parallel direction to that of the recoil. This would change the direction of the orbit somewhat, and consequently the duration of the year, but in such a mild way that it must be considered as absolutely free from bad results. At the same time, the earth takes a new movement of rotation around an axis in the plane of the equator, and the daily rotation will then be accomplished indefinitely upon this new axis, as if no daily movement had existed previous to the shock. At present, this movement is made around the lines of the poles, and in combination with the accessory force produced by the recoil there was created a new axis, the pole of which moves from the present to the amount of a quantity called x. In other words, if the cannon is fired at the moment when the vernal equinox, one of the intersections of the equator and the ecliptic, is at the nadir of the point of shooting, and if the recoil is sufficiently strong to displace the old pole 23 degrees 28 minutes, the new axis becomes perpendicular to the direction of the earth's orbit, the same as it is for the planet Jupiter. What the consequences were expected to be were already known, as President Barbicane had indicated them at the meeting of the 22nd of December. But, given the mass of the earth and the quantity of momentum which she possesses, is it possible to conceive a piece of ordnance so strong that its recoil will be able to produce a modification in the actual direction of the real pole, and especially to the extent of 23 degrees 28 minutes? Yes, if a cannon or a series of cannons are built with the dimensions required by the laws of mechanics, or, in lieu of these dimensions, if the inventors were in possession of an explosive strong enough to impel a projectile with the necessary velocity for such displacement. Now, taking as a basis model the cannon of 27 centimeters of the French Marine Corps, which throws a projectile of 180 kilograms with an initial velocity of 500 meters per second, by giving to this piece of ordnance an increased dimension of 100 miles, that is, 1,000,000 times in volume, it would throw a projectile of 180,000 tons, or in other words, if the powder had strength sufficient to give to the projectile an initial velocity 5,600 times greater than that of the old black powder used for a cannon, the desired result would be obtained. In fact, with a velocity of 2,800 kilometers a second, a velocity sufficient to go from Paris to St. Petersburg in 1 second, there was no doubt that the recoil of the projectile, acting against the earth, would put everything again in a state of quietude. Well, extraordinary as it may appear, J.T. Maston and his associates had in their possession exactly this explosive, of a nearly unlimited power, and of which the gunpowder used to throw the ball of the Columbiad towards the moon gave but a faint idea. It was Captain Nicholl who had discovered it. The substances which entered into its composition were only imperfectly entered in the notebook of Mr. Maston, and he merely named it melimelonite. All that was known was that it was formed by the reaction of a melomelo of organic substances and azotic acids. No matter what the explosive was, with the power which it possessed it was more than sufficient to throw a projectile weighing 180,000 tons outside of the earth's attraction, and it was evident that the recoil which it would produce to the cannon would have the effect of changing the axis, displacing the North Pole 23 degrees in 28 minutes, bringing the new axis in the direction of the ecliptic, and, as consequence of this, effecting all the changes so justly dreaded by the inhabitants of the earth. However, there was one chance for humanity to escape the consequences of this trial, which was to provoke such a revulsion in the geographical and climatic conditions of the globe. Was it possible to build a cannon of such dimensions that it was to be 1,000,000 times greater in volume than the one of 27 centimeters? It was doubtful. That was just the point, and one of the reasons for thinking the attempt of Barbicane & Co. would not succeed. But there was the other possibility, for it seemed that the company had already begun to work on their gigantic project. Now the question arose, where was their place of operation? No one knew, and consequently it was impossible to overtake these audacious operations. It was well known that Barbicane and Nicholl had left Baltimore in America. They had gone away 2 months ago. Where were they? Most certainly at that unknown point of the globe which the operations were under way for the grand object. It was evident that the place was indicated on the last page of the notebook of J.T. Maston. On this point there was no doubt. But the last page had been torn out and eaten up by the accomplice of Impey Barbicane, and Maston sat imprisoned in the Baltimore City prison, and absolutely refused to speak. This was the condition of affairs. If the President succeeded in making the monster cannon and its projectile, in a word, if the operation was carried out under and above the stated conditions, it would modify the earth's axis, and within 6 months the earth would be subject to the consequences of this audacious attempt of Barbicane & Co. This would come on the 22nd day of September, 12 hours after the passage of the sun over the meridian of the place X. The facts that were known were, first, that the shooting would be done with a cannon 1,000,000 times larger than the cannon of 27 centimeters. Second, that the cannon would be loaded with a projectile of 180,000 tons. Third, that the projectile would be animated with a velocity of 2,800 kilometers. Fourth, that the shooting would take place on the 22nd of September, 12 hours after the passage of the sun over a meridian at the place X. Was it possible to deduce, under these facts, where was the spot X where the operation was to take place? Evidently not, said the Inquiry Committee. There was nothing by which to calculate where the point X was, and nothing of the calculations of Mr. Maston indicated through which the point of the globe the new axis was to pass, or in other words, on which part of the present earth the new poles would be situated. Therefore it would be impossible to know which would be elevated and submerged countries, due to the changed surface of the ocean, or which parts of the earth would be transformed into water, and where the water would be transformed into land. It was evident that the maximum change in the ocean surface would be 8.415 meters, and that in certain points of the globe various areas would be lowered and raised to this amount. All, however, depended on the location of the point X, or where the shooting was to take place. In other words, X was the secret of the promoter of this uncertain affair. "We have," said the committee, "only to mention again that the inhabitants of this world, no matter in what part of it they are living, are directly interested in knowing this secret, as they are all directly threatened by the actions of Barbicane & Co. Therefore, all the inhabitants of Europe, Asia, Africa, America, and Australia are advised to watch all gun foundries, powder foundries, etc., which are situated in the territory, and to note the presence of strangers whose arrivals may appear suspicious, and to advise the Inquiry Committee at Baltimore by wire immediately. Heaven grant that this news may arrive before the 22nd of September of the present year, as that date threatens to disturb the order established since the creation in our earthly system." End of chapter 11.